So if you're interested in the geopolitics of this part of the world, that is to say the Baltics and Central and Eastern Europe, then you'll certainly have heard of the Suwalki Gap by now.
Suwałki Gap.
The Suwalki Corridor.
The Suwałki Gap.
Suwałku koridorius.
In case this is a completely new name for you, well, it's this small piece of land here, which is a roughly 100-kilometer wide stretch of land marking the Lithuanian-Polish border. One Politico article calls it the most dangerous place on Earth, while others have called it NATO's weakest point.
NATO's dangerous spot.
The most dangerous place on Earth. The weak spot in the West's armour.
One of the biggest areas that we need to worry about.
If Vladimir Putin wanted to strike at NATO, this is where many fear he would do it.
Well, it's not hard to see why the Suwalki Gap has these names. It's sandwiched between unfriendly, non-allied territory, the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad to the west and Belarus to the east. Should conflict erupt between Russia or Belarus and Latvia or Lithuania, well, then the Suwalki Gap will be key to moving allied forces to where they need to be.
Russians would essentially prohibit or prevent the NATO allies from flowing materiel, reinforcements up into the Baltic states to push out any Russian invader.
In the defense of NATO, it is prime and key land.
Military analysts say Russia could attack from two ends of the Suwalki Gap, with soldiers from Kaliningrad and forces advancing through Belarus, which would leave NATO members Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia isolated.
So, with all of this in mind, I want to look at how Lithuania and Poland have been working to secure this important corridor and preparing for those worst-case scenarios. So, full disclosure, I still haven't been to this part of Lithuania. I mean, I suppose I did travel through it like 2 times by coach bus, but this was years ago when I was completely unaware of the geopolitical significance of the area. Also, I think that they were night buses, and so it was probably dark outside anyways. But part of a Baltic Security Foundation webpage described the area of the Suwalki Gap like this. The terrain is heavily forested and hilly and is dotted with lakes, rivers, and marshes. Forests and lakes comprise approximately 50% of the land area, while swamps form another 11%. Many of the coniferous forests in the region are practically impassable, and most are inaccessible, or at least foolhardy, terrain. Clay and sandy clay soils in the region make for impassable conditions in rainy weather with deep, dense, and soggy mud. And indeed, rainy weather is typical for much of the year, from the spring thaws all the way to autumn. In the wintertime, snow and frost inhibit movement. This webpage goes on to say that the limited road system in the region is poor, and many bridges can only sustain a weight of about 50 tons, which will support a Russian tank, but not an American or British tank, as these average about 70 tons. Besides weight limitations, these roads will not sustain movements of larger military vehicles in formation, meaning such equipment would either be forced to find alternate routes or would be channeled into long, slow lines or short caravans with limited numbers, nullifying any numerical advantage offensive forces might have. So, examining the map, we can see that there's really only one major road going through this corridor. In Lithuania, it's known as the A5, while it's apparently the S61 in Poland. For EU referencing, it's part of the European route E67, which in its full form runs from Prague in the Czech Republic to Estonia. In terms of rail connectivity, there's a railroad to the east, and I guess it's close to Sienej Alksniene in Lithuania and Trakiszki in Poland. In early 2020, the Baltic Security Foundation reported that Lithuania and Poland announced that they would each assign a brigade to NATO headquarters in Poland to, quote, train and act together for the defense of the Suwalki Gap. According to the signed act of affiliation, Lithuania's Iron Wolf Mechanized Brigade and Poland's 15th Mechanized Brigade would train jointly to prepare for operations in the Gap, although they would remain under their own national command. This cooperation stemmed from the creation of the Polish-Lithuanian Defense Council, which allows for greater cooperation on defense and security-related matters. A 2022 paper published by the General Jonas Žemaitis Military Academy of Lithuania again highlights that Poland is key for reinforcement of the Baltic states. According to reports, NATO contingency plans for liberating the Baltic states, codenamed Eagle Guardian, call for heavy reliance on Polish troops and ports. Also in 2022, Polish and Lithuanian chiefs of defense met with each other to enhance military cooperation and to sign the Orsha Agreement, an agreement which lays out priorities and major areas for further cooperation. According to Lithuanian public broadcaster LRT, the Orsha cooperation agreement is mostly classified, and so it makes sense that I can't find any specific plans regarding the protection of the Suwalki corridor. However, Kęstutis Budrys, an advisor to Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda, said that the Orsha agreement, quote, provides the interoperability measures on both sides of the border to ensure security and to respond to certain threats. Well, in the absence of any specific and open source plans, it's clear that joint military exercises are extremely important in preparing the defense of this area.
We were able to do a crossing through the Suwalki Gap to tactically link in with the forward passage of lines, to secure the lines of communication, to continue to keep our ability to work as a NATO alliance and to have no split between us.
This is the very specific terrain that we could find ourselves having to come to the aid of our allies and partners.
We're simulating a force called the Bosnians cutting off one of the supply routes to the Baltic states, and we're about to go on an aviation insertion with our ground troops.
The most recent example of this was in April 2024, when Poland and Lithuania began joint military exercises to test their readiness to defend the Suwalki Gap. Military personnel from the US and Portugal also took part in this specific set of exercises, named Brave Griffin 24-2. This exercise was notably said to be based on the Lithuanian-Polish Orsha plan. This exercise saw military movements in the areas of Druskininkai City Municipality and Alytus, Lazdijai, and Varėna regional territories on the Lithuanian side of the border, and involved some 1,500 troops and 200 units of military equipment. During the exercise, personnel of the Griffin Brigade joined into a task force with the National Defense Volunteer Force personnel and Portuguese colleagues to secure and protect strategically important areas in their respective areas of responsibility by the side of the river Nemunas. That looks to be right around here, which itself partially forms the border with Belarus. I'll just read directly from the Lithuanian Armed Forces press release about it all. According to the reconnaissance company commander, Griffin Infantry Brigade, an extraordinary assignment required non-standard decisions, precise planning, involvement, and synchronization of different capabilities. A water body is typically seen as an obstacle. In this situation, we interpreted water as an opportunity instead. A quick and unnoticed approach to capture the objects by means of relevant skills, tools, and allied support. The result of the operation has demonstrated that the scouts have been prepared for wide spectrum and complex operations, individually and in a reconnaissance unit, and in cooperation with other units or NATO allies. But maybe these days, the Suwalki Gap isn't the vulnerable choke point that it used to be. At least according to this piece by Euronews, titled, "NATO used to fret over Russia's threat against the Suwalki Gap. The threat is now smaller than ever." This article highlights the fact that things have changed a lot over the years, significant changes that took place in 2014 and then again in 2022. With the Lithuanian-German plan to host the German brigade on Lithuanian territory, and Lithuania's own plans to grow its land forces, well, there's more optimism that the Suwalki Gap is not the vulnerable area that it used to be. But I don't know. What do you think about all of this? What do you think needs to be done to ensure the security of the Suwalki Gap? Let me know by leaving a comment. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. If you enjoy this channel and want to support me in making more videos, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. There's a link down in the description for you to check out. Thanks so much for watching.